Tonight, President Trump is hospitalized at Walter Reed Hospital. Doctors say he is taken there out of an abundance of caution to be treated for COVID-19.
President Trump plans to keep working from the hospital after he and First Lady Melania Trump tested positive late last night. The White House says both are experiencing mild symptoms.
And this just in, another person close to the president has tested positive. Former White House counselor Kellyanne Conway, she's now the 6th person to test positive after attending a White House event to announce Supreme Court Justice nominee Amy Coney Barrett on Saturday. Conway tweeted tonight she has a light cough but is feeling fine as she begins quarantining at home.
While the First Lady has a cough and headache, the president is experiencing fatigue, a low-grade fever, cough, and congestion. The president's doctor says he was given an experimental antibody drug made by Regeneron Pharmaceuticals. It's considered one of the most promising approaches to preventing some of the serious symptoms from COVID-19, although it is still being tested. The president, who has been unusually quiet on social media today, tweeted this video statement before leaving the White House.
I think I'm doing very well, but we're going to make sure that things work out. The First Lady is doing very well.
Now, health officials are busy doing contact tracing, reaching everyone the president has had close contact with this week, especially during Tuesday night's debate in Ohio, a rally in Minnesota Wednesday, and yesterday's fundraiser in New Jersey.
And here's a look at some of the people who got coronavirus tests today and tested negative, including Vice President Mike Pence and his wife Karen, former VP Joe Biden and his wife Jill. Biden responded to the president's diagnosis by pulling his negative campaign ads. He also tweeted today that, quote, "This is not a partisan moment, it's an American moment, and we have to come together."
According to the CDC, age and weight are high-risk factors when it comes to developing severe symptoms of COVID-19. And because the president is 74 years old and considered obese, he falls in the critical risk category. I got some more insight into this, along with a possible course of treatment from Dr. Linda Yancey, an infectious disease expert at Memorial Hermann.
Are we looking at a certain timeline?
So certainly they're going to keep a very close eye on him within the next 10 days. And that's going to involve monitoring of his oxygen saturation and supplying extra oxygen if needed. Again, hopefully he'll have a nice mild course and will not need supplemental oxygen. After that 10 days, we're not exactly out of the woods, but the odds of developing severe disease after that point go down.
Like so many other Americans, he has some pre-existing conditions. Can we talk about those and the impact it could have on him having the virus?
So we know that the virus tends to hit folks harder the older they are. So that is something kind of working against him. He is not as young as he might be. He's also a bit overweight, which is also a risk factor for more severe disease. Now, to my knowledge, he's not a diabetic, and I know he doesn't smoke. So those are both things in his favor.
I have to ask about stress. I mean, all of us have stress in our lives, but no one more than perhaps the President of the United States. What role can stress play in the president recovering from the coronavirus?
There is nothing in this world that stress does not make worse, and physical illness is definitely one of those things. I would hope that he's listening to his doctors and listening to his advisors and potentially offloading some of his duties to others that he trusts during this time. Again, he really needs to be focused on himself for the next 10 days.
Hoping the best for the president tonight. There are a lot of questions about what happens next since we're so close to the election. So the Verify team is getting you answers. Here's Jason Puckett.
We're talking about the president and first lady testing positive for COVID-19 and what that means this close to an election, and what Senator Mike Lee's positive diagnosis could mean for the vote to advance Judge Amy Coney Barrett as the Supreme Court nominee. First question, if the president is sick, can the election be delayed? Yes, but Congress would have to make that decision, and they don't have much time. Article 2 of the Constitution says Congress determines the time of the vote. The law currently sets Election Day as the first Tuesday following the first Monday of November. So Congress would have to pass a new law to change that, requiring approval by both the House and Senate. However, the 20th Amendment says that the new Congress and president must be in place by January. Next question. What happens with the election if a candidate drops out of the race this late? Well, according to the bylaws of both the Democratic National Committee and Republican National Committee, the leadership of both parties would decide who replaces the candidates. That's only happened once in 1972 when VP candidate Thomas Eagleton resigned from the Democratic ticket after the DNC. Party leaders replaced him with another candidate. The big difference, though, that all happened in August. So what about the debates? The next presidential debate is scheduled for the 15th, less than 2 weeks from now. CDC guidelines for COVID-19 patients include isolating for at least 10 days after symptoms first appear. So will the next debate be moved, canceled, or done virtually? Well, right now, we don't know. The Commission on Presidential Debates hasn't said what they're doing in response to this news. As of now, the debates are still scheduled. The last question has to do with Senator Mike Lee's announcement that he tested positive for COVID-19 and is isolating right now. Senator Lee sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is scheduled to start nomination hearings for Judge Amy Coney Barrett to serve as a Supreme Court justice starting October 12th. Main question, can Senator Lee vote remotely if he's still isolated? We checked with the rules of the Senate Judiciary Committee and found the answer is yes. In the committee, a senator can vote, quote, by writing or by telephone or through personal instructions. However, if the vote moved past the committee while Lee was still isolating, he would have to return in person to vote on a Senate floor vote because voting by proxy is not allowed outside committees. Now, so far, both Mike Lee and Judiciary Committee Chair Senator Lindsey Graham both say Lee is planning to isolate now, but will return in person to vote on the nomination process. Folks, if you have other claims or questions for us to look into, send us an email. With your Verify, I'm Jason Puckett.
All right, so we just mentioned Senator Mike Lee. Now it's confirmed that Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina also tested positive today. He too is on the Judiciary Committee and will isolate at home for the next 10 days. This is a story we'll be watching very closely over the coming days. We'll bring you any new developments as they come in with updates on air, online, and the KHU 11 News app.